Hello, everybody, and welcome to another quick Merlin the Mighty movie review video. This one is going to be me reviewing Venom, Let There Be Carnage, which is a sequel to the 2018 Venom movie. Now, just want a little bit of context here. I believe I reviewed the first Venom movie a couple years ago, and against my better judgment, I think I gave it a pretty positive review, mostly because I was in a theater where everybody else seemed to love it, where I admit that maybe my stubborn comic book connection to some things kind of made that maybe difficult for me to kind of get on board. But a little bit of context to that, just to remind you, my biggest issue with the Venom movie in general, and just kind of really the premise for these movies, has just been that traditionally, and I'll admit that you can have different interpretations of characters, and I'm pretty open to that for the most part. I do think what I'm most used to with Venom is him being a villain. I really like him best as a villain, and maybe as sort of a dark anti-hero, that lethal protector, where okay, very 90s, he's got the over the top, super violent, alien guy that's just eating criminals and stuff, which they kind of hint at the movie, but they go all in with the fact that he's not. Eddie Brock generally has not been a very good person. Like, that's what he generally as a basis was, kind of a shady reporter, and just all around not a very nice guy. That's just the typical stuff that I've been exposed to, is the classic Venom from the late 80s and 90s. So I think Venom works best as a villain, or as a strong, dark kind of anti-hero. Is definitely more on the more evil side of that spectrum there. So the fact that they kind of try to play up the humor and make him goofy and kooky, they do try to make Eddie Brock sort of more likable by just making him kind of a mess. And Tom Hardy is a good actor, so he managed to kind of sell that pretty well. And it was fun. And I think that, as good as trying to make Venom a hero in the first movie, I think they did a decent job, though. Like I said, I was probably the stubborn person at the theater, like that. This is not the Venom character, and my stubborn comic book fandom was actually coming through there. Sometimes I'm a little. I'm most annoyed, like I say, if they betray I think the core aspect of a character. That's when I really get mad. Kind of like how I feel about the Dark Knight, the Dark Knight Rises. The ending of that. That's kind of my big issue with that. But if they play around with the character a little bit, I'm fine with that. So I was like, okay, they made it entertaining. It was fine. Then there's the second movie. I'll let you know. As a kid, like, this just shows, I guess, the stuff I was kind of exposed to. Like, when I one of the first comic books, I think the first comic I ever was bought or read, was actually a comic with Carnage in it. So he was probably the first Spider-Man villain I was exposed to when I was getting into comics as a kid. That was kind of the boom, like the mid late 90s, of the Venom, Carnage, symbiote stuff. They were everywhere, and all the comics were, in addition to being really over the top, they were starting to really. They were more adult in the sense that, I don't know if they were the most mature, but it's like, we can have violence, we can have more sexualization stuff that was kind of there for a long time, but 90s it got really amped up, right? Rob Liefeld and all that stuff. So over the top, but also gritty at the same time. So that's where Spider-Man really was, and that's kind of the era I sort of was growing up in when I was first introduced to comics. So I know quite a bit about Carnage, and I always liked Carnage. I will admit, I think he's not the most complicated in terms of characterization of Spider-Man's villains. He's pretty much, we've said, my buddy Troll and I, that he's basically the Joker with a symbiote. But I think the Joker is a more interesting and often explored character with a lot of nuances. Whereas Cletus Cassidy, they have given some insight into his childhood, which they touch on a little bit in this movie, which I remember reading some comics, but they typically don't explore that. Generally, they just use Carnage as kind of like, he's wacky, but he's also really dangerous. But they don't really, he doesn't have as much nuance as, say, a lot of other Spider-Man villains. So would he be in my top 10 Spider-Man villains now? I don't know. But he is a really good villain. He's certainly one of the most dangerous ones, and visually one of the coolest looking. And I will say that I think Woody Harrelson has a good time portraying him, and I think that was pretty good casting. I think that for the character. Um, and I watched this one with my sister, so I wasn't alone, and the people in the theater, I think, were kind of with me on this one. And so forgive me if you like this. I want to go out here and say this: people that know me and people that have watched this channel know that I try hard to be open minded, and I don't want to give people a hard time whenever they're putting together a movie and making it. I know how much goes into that, and I admire that. I really, when I'm giving my opinion on something, I really try to give things the benefit of doubt and try to find the positive. There are some positives, but this movie was a mess. I really didn't like it. Like I really, this is, and I haven't seen as many movies as I used to, but of the movies I have seen in recent years, it's one of the worst I've seen in theaters in a long time. Um, and I think a lot of that has to do with tone. But and don't get me wrong, I like campy, I like goofy. I really applaud comic book movies that kind of embrace the silliness of comic books, like, and they're not all made to the same level. But Guardians of the Galaxy or even Suicide Squad recently is a good example of that, of embracing that camp and being silly, but still having a coherent story with strong characters that we care about and maybe some themes and things to get us thinking a little bit. Have a little bit of dimension and layers. And there's also nothing wrong with a lot of fun popcorn where you turn your brain off, but you want that to be somewhat fluid as well, I think. There was just a lot. I really just feel like this movie was almost written by or for someone who was adhering to ADHD and like for those audiences, or maybe yet just like one positive sort of that I tried to look at it was saying that if 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 I had seen this movie when I was 13 and it was fresh off of when Carnage and Venom were really popular and it was really that really ridiculous over the top uh, sort of comic book stuff back in the 90s, it kind of leaning into that spirit, I would have actually enjoyed it because like more because it's really just that. This whole movie is just to get Venom and Carnage to fight each other, which is just what you want to see in the comics and those awesome, two-page spreads, all the time. So if it's kind of leaning into that idea, that energy, embracing that camp fully as a silly thing, like for a 13-year-old audience, it also seemed like it could have been written by a 13-year-old. Like when I was coming up with Spider-Man fan fiction, I feel like this is what it would look like on screen. Which isn't it's not necessarily trying to be a detriment, but it just seems like that was kind of the lens. It just there's a lot of stuff that just isn't fleshed out. And to me, the movie, like when I saw the trailer beforehand, before I saw the Sopranos movie, and I'm like, I have a feeling that's about as much story that's in the movie as the stuff we saw in the trailer. And I was right. Like the movie to me, like I was unintentional. There were some funny jokes in the movie. There were some good quips, but there was a lot of stuff that I was laughing because I wasn't sure what I was seeing, and I thought some of it was just kind of like I don't think that I was supposed to laugh at some of those scenes, and my sister felt the same way, and some of the people in the audience did too. Like some of the lines that came out, like what is, like I mean I get the cartooniness, but it seemed like it this to me this barely seemed like a movie and really just more of a series of vaguely connected scenes that kind of had just enough to be considered a plot so that we could get Venom and Carnage to that church to fight each other, which was the best part of the movie. But really everything up till that, Eddie Brock's character, him as a reporter with his issues, just being kind of, I have a hard time believing he had any success because he seems like such a mess, and he's like kind of a level goofball, but he's not really somebody I feel like can get some. I know they're trying to do an everyman thing, but that's all we really see is him not really being that successful in any particular way. I mean, I guess he seems sort of nice, but he's just a very unassuming sort of guy. Very different than the traditional Eddie Brock character because you got to try to make Venom likable, I guess. So the the I didn't really care about the cop and his story that much. I didn't really care about the romance he had from the last movie because that wasn't very well developed. It seemed like everyone was there just kind of doing their lines, and it was all just a big joke. And there just was nothing fleshed out. There wasn't enough time really to sit on any of these things. There wasn't a lot of weight or gravity that didn't wasn't invested in anything. There wasn't enough time in any of it, because it's like, oh, we're just here to just have stuff happen so that we can get the big fight scenes to happen. Really, and it's kind of like, admittedly, what happened in the comics was pretty simple for how Carnage is created, because the symbiote just kind of attaches to Cletus when they're sharing a cell and Venom breaks free. So okay, he bites Eddie Brock, and then the symbiote blood gets in him and kind of mutates and becomes things. So like fine, but that's also like the level of writing. It's just incredibly simplistic, but like even if the plot's simple, there's not much to the characters to make them likable or fleshed out, and the plot barely there. It seems like nobody's taking it seriously. You've got these scenes where there's weird cartoon imagery about flashbacks to Cletus, which was visually cool, but it sort of took me out of the movie because it seemed like a different style. You had some weird blue screen stuff with Woody Harrelson. You have these weird internal monologues sometimes, and the fast forwarding. What they give Venom these weird powers where he can he can type really fast, which I don't know if that's a thing. And at one point he could, I think Carnage. They gave Carnage more powers I wasn't aware of. Like he could cause the wind to turn to make tornadoes, and he could hack into a computer using his symbiote, and he could create a display which showed the internet or the dark web to find information, but with a screensaver that looked kind of like the symbiote, red and black themed. Like it's like they just said we're going to throw these cool visuals, but I'm like, I don't. I mean, I'll admit I'm not as up on Carnage as I used to be, but like he can shapeshift. He's kind of like a liquidy sort of guy. He's got super strength. He can form his hands into knives and daggers and stuff and hit people with them. He's tough. He's, but I don't think he could do stuff like that. He's powerful, but I don't think he could hack electronics by fusing with them and then go into the internet. I was like, what is happening? And uh, stuff like that. It was just so cartoony. There's this line where Eddie's saying like, "I'm a real boy and you're an amoeba," because he and Venom have sort of this relationship. It's almost like a bromance thing, which is kind of funny but kind of weird. And I don't know how we're supposed to feel about it. Like, because that the line was just like, I don't know if was that supposed to be funny, because it's just the delivery was weird, the acting, it was just so incoherent. The only thing that was consistent about it was that it was kind of sporadic and all over the place, which admittedly made it interesting to watch, though I felt kind of exhausted by the end. Like, I just kind of want this movie to be over. But there are some positives. I told you I'd try. I do think Tom Hardy's doing good with what he has. I think that the other actors are doing well with what they're being given. I think Andy Serkis directed this, which I thought was interesting. Maybe I know he's got a lot of the CGI and motion cap work done, but maybe working with live action people is something he needs to work on. So that surprised me. So I like Andy Serkis. So I was really confused about the direction here and the editing choices and stuff like that. But here's some positives. Okay. It was kind of fun and silly, so I don't think you should take it too seriously. Though it was a bit incoherent, I think, compared to something like Suicide Squad, which I think was sillier, but I think much better quality for the characters and the story and the consistency of editing and whatnot. But anyway, positives. I think Venom, when he was Venom, and Carnage, when they were Carnage, were good. Looked pretty good. He was funny interacting with people. Some of his jokes were funny. It did seem kind of like the Venom character from the 90s with his sarcastic jokes. Okay, so there was that. And my sister and I agreed Carnage and Shriek, actually. And I'm not sure the actress was, I thought she might have been the witch from that one Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but they were good. The villains in this movie were good. I kind of wish they had a little more nuance to them as well, but you know what? That's about as much as they were in the comics. So I was like, you know what? That's acceptable. They're over the top. They're evil. They're having fun. But they try to humanize them a little bit. They were good. They were having a good time. The actors were doing good, I think. There were some cool visuals. I really liked Shriek, actually, who was I knew about in the comics a little bit, but I really liked her in this movie. I do think the CGI wasn't the best. Like I think it might have been a little better for the symbiote effects in the last movie, honestly. Like, so it was, they did a good job, but I feel like it didn't look quite as good as maybe it could have been, though I'm sure it took a lot to do, of course, in animate. But I just wonder, like, another, once again, 5-10 years, how well is that going to hold up? Like, I was like, it's not. I feel like the CGI could be a little better here with those effects, but it was still entertaining. There were some cool visuals with some of those fights. The action was pretty fun. Once again, some things I didn't understand, but whatever. Symbiotes, you can have fun time, I guess. So there was that. Let's see, another positive. Yeah, actually, that was pretty much it. I think that the symbiote was having a good time. Oh, and the two other things. The credits actually was one of my favorite. Was my favorite. Honestly, one of my favorite things about the movie, because it was just this really cool. I don't know what this says. One of the best things about the movie is the end credits, because But seriously, whoever did the artwork and the design, kind of playing with all these backdrops with the symbiotes, Venom and Carnage, it looked really cool, very colorful. And the second Eminem song, because I guess he did another song in continuation to his other one, which I thought was pretty silly. I actually really liked this song better. I think this was a better song to complement the movie from Eminem. Okay, and also, even though I thought the movie was a mess and I was laughing at it, I was angry at it, and I don't think it was good. I had some fun with it, but I'll tell you what, it kind of redeemed itself for me because the end credits, after post credit sequence, spoilers, turn it off, watch it if you don't want to see it. I heard, I heard J. Jonah Jameson. I heard his voice because we see it seemed like something shifts, and he seems like he's in a different hotel room at the end of the movie after he takes Venom on a little vacation, ends up somewhere else. Ah, we hear okay, and then we see Tom Holland's Spider-Man on the TV. J.K. Simmons is the is the Jonah. I'm like, they're bringing him into Marvel. They're bringing him into maybe the multi-universe stuff, or maybe they're going to bring him actually into the MCU. So okay, tonally, I think they got some stuff to work out. Maybe there'll be a soft reboot, but I'm like, okay, so maybe Marvel will actually get to tackle Venom, and Marvel Studios usually seems to know what they're doing. So that I actually remember being like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, oh, I was like, okay. I think okay, like so as even though the movie was a pretty mixed bag, that last end credit sequence was awesome. Like, okay, Venom will be in the MCU. Maybe he'll be in a one of the MCU Spider-Man movies. So because for me, they jumped right to Carnage because what are you gonna do with Carnage? I mean, what are you gonna do with Venom? Logically, do Carnage next because I think that unfortunately Venom might be a little more limited because I think he works best as a Spider-Man villain. And I remember saying to my sister, you know what this movie really could use? Spider-Man. So between him and Spider-Man and explore it because I really think that's where the real meat is. The core of Venom as a villain or a more villainous character or anti-hero who clashes with Spider-Man because it's really integral to his origin. So anyway, movie was a mess. I don't think it was a great, but there was some fun in it for sure. I think some camp. You could get enjoyment in it, but it was quite messy. So I think I might have actually liked the first movie a little better. I think it was a little more coherent. But maybe that was just me. I know that people liked the first one a lot more than I did. Maybe people liked this one. I know if you're hardcore Venom Carnage fans, maybe if you read more recent comics, you've got more insight. So it's fine if you liked it. I do think there were good things about it, but man, I do think it's hard to get past the writing, the acting, and the editing and direction was I do think underdeveloped and sloppy, but maybe that is kind of just indicative of these characters, unfortunately, especially Carnage. But it was still fun to it in a weird way. So I'm curious to see if people liked it more than I did. But anyway, let me know your thoughts below. Thank you for watching, sticking with me. There should maybe be some more movie reviews coming out this month. I am still on sort of a hiatus, but I'm still trying to get videos out when I can. I've got a Fullmetal Alchemist video I'm slowly editing, so hopefully that'll be out in a couple weeks. We'll see. But appreciate everything. Like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, stay magical.